This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey, Brian Tripp with you here on what is just an absolute beautiful late April day as we do record this here on Tuesday morning. And we got a great pod for you here. Some more spring games in the books. We'll give you some reactions to those as well. Some big time spring portal news. Two teams make big impact splashes here for 2025. We'll tell you about those details. NFL draft history here for the Big Ten. We'll fill you in. And there's one respectable college football analyst that I think threw some major disrespect towards one Big Ten quarterback. We'll tell you about that here. We got a loaded pod for you. And so not only Tripp, do we have a lot to talk about as we see the calendar now as we're in late April. It's also grading season for all teachers out there, including my guy, Brian Tripp. Is that true?
Professor Tripp, Com260W, news writing, Penn State. That is my job. Yeah, I was up probably, I'll be honest. I've really, really enjoyed the chance to teach students and try to learn how students today, you and I, when we went to college, basically at the same time, you're a little bit younger than me, but when I was in school, we were still getting daily newspapers and everything. Like social media was a thing, but probably not the only thing. It was part of your experience, but not a live and die part of your experience, as I think it is with students today. Like I had to ask my class in general, honestly, it was like a genuine curiosity. Where do you get your news? How do you consume it? And none, and I mean none of the students in an 18-person class said that they go to read it on a web. Like I wasn't expecting a hard copy newspaper, but magazine, newspaper, like a website, actually reading an article, no one. It's always captions, social media, TikToks, posts, videos. And it's a news writing class. And I'm like, how do I teach news writing to a group that's never consumed news writing, but then also doesn't believe that there's a value in it because they look at it and go, well, I'm never going to do this or use this because I don't utilize this in my life. So that was the greatest challenge when I started doing the class. And then to try to get them to understand to be good at something, just like you hosting a podcast or a radio show, feather in your cap there, you have to watch, listen, see how people do it. Like to get them actually to pick up something and read is a real challenge. A real challenge. And I'm still convinced more than 50% still haven't. They'll write their own stuff, but they still don't read anything. Really hard to try to connect with people in 2025, the younger generation of 2025. It's a little scary. Like I don't like to think that you and I are old by any stretch of the imagination. We're getting up there, but I don't like to think of us as old. When it comes to talking to 19, 20, and 21-year-olds, oh, we're old. We're real old here in our mid-30s.
I was going to say, like, you think 10, 15 years is not that wide of a gap that you kind of experience kind of the same events. You're right. It is two different worlds. No doubt about it. Professor Tripp got his work cut out for him here as the semester rolling to an end. A tradition, just like grading at the end of a semester, that now is becoming more and more popular here, is that spring games, Tripp, are one on the way out and going away. But even for the teams that do rarely have a spring game here in 2025, it's not televised. So for those Penn State fans, for those curious about one of the most interesting and most talented teams in the country, what they look like coming out of spring, you really didn't get any answers unless you were in Beaver Stadium on Saturday. But that is why we have some great intel. That's why we have Brian Tripp on the pod. This guy knows more than everyone else here on the pod, which is a low bar to set when there's only one other person you were talking to. But you were there. You saw the sights. Tripp, some takeaways here from Penn State's spring game. Let's break them down.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I want to start with Penn State because I think Ari Wasserman was the one who put the tweet out yesterday and said that this really is a team with some of the portal additions that they've made. And we'll talk about one of them coming up in just a little bit at the wide receiver position. And I know after the game, James Franklin was pretty adamant, like, we're not done at linebacker. Tamir Robinson, who we discussed last week going to USC, that was one that surprised them. They didn't expect to lose him. They thought he was a big piece of the puzzle there. And I really liked him and what he brought to the table at that position as someone who's looking to fill the shoes of a guy like Kobe King, who went to the Minnesota Vikings in the NFL draft. I thought at first when you brought up grading, I thought we were starting to do draft grades or recruiting grades here. I was like, I didn't prepare for that for today.
I think draft grades are fun. They're also the most overrated and useless thing possible because we're grading people that haven't even put a helmet on yet as a good pick or bad pick when most of these guys, especially quarterbacks, bust out. No, we are not going to go draft grades here. I can promise you that.
Well, I'm very thankful for that because I've done enough grading for one morning. All right. So the hardest thing that has been the hardest thing of being a professor is sitting down. No, I think I'm fair. As long as you meet the criteria, and I can tell you put hard work in and effort in. It's a writing class. Students enter the course with different levels of writing capabilities. As long as you're showing growth, development, and effort, and show up and you ask questions and you're improving, that's really all I can ask. So,
and I think that's what anyone would want from a teacher, boss, position of power.
Yeah.
Just be fair. Just be fair.
So I was curious going into the spring game. Not so much like, look, I think it's hard in a spring game. What can you really evaluate? It's just one in a set of 15 practices. This one is open to the public, and whether it's televised or not, you're still putting something out there in front of the public eye. With media on the sideline, with fans in the stands, in today's day and age, just like we're talking about those students in the beginning, right? Everyone has their phone out. That's the great thing of watching. You're talking about a tradition unlike any other. That's the great thing about watching the Masters and not seeing all the patrons with their phones out, like they live in the moment. So nothing, whether it's televised or not, I don't know that it changes the exposure that's going to happen out of a game. Probably not able to, if you're another team watching, get that full field perspective and see what's a lineman doing, a defensive lineman, a linebacker, how they're reading a coverage, what's the coverage like. And I know Rutgers had theirs televised this weekend. Oregon had theirs televised this weekend. I do want to go back, and I think that's a good topic for next week. Oregon's got a lot of intriguing storylines. Like they have so many different puzzle pieces that they're trying to meld together coming out of the spring. And I think for next week, we want to do a really deep dive into Oregon. But having been at Penn State, first I was curious what the attendance would be like. Because living in State College, a college football hotbed, and a town that 7 fall Saturdays a year is unhinged on game week. And I think there's nothing like the Wednesday and Thursday when people start coming into town in the Friday leading up to the game, the excitement, the energy in a college town. I love that. I love that buzz that you get the days leading up to a big game, to any game, but in particular, a big game in a place like Penn State where the RVs line up days in advance. They're parked at Walmart, they're parked at Target, and then they finally get a chance to get into the tailgating lots, and downtown is bustling. And I think you get that across the Big Ten at a lot of these schools in the Big Ten. So I was curious, though, what would the attendance be like? Because here in State College and living here, I didn't feel that hype, that buzz. I felt like, well, is it because Penn State could be one of the top 5 teams in the country next year? Not really a lot of unknowns. You bring your quarterback back, your running backs back, your offensive line back. Jim Knowles has a lot of pieces returning on defense, really strong secondary, a couple of key cogs in Zane Durant and Denai Dennis Sutton on that defensive line. Was it because the season went so long, and not just at Penn State, but the Ohio State Notre Dame National Championship, that's late January. You have all the talk about the portal, the playoff format, name, image, likeness, the House settlement. I just felt like there might be some sport fatigue right now going on in the world of college football. Everyone knows what the discourse has been about these spring games. Is this the last edition of the Penn State blue-white game? Who knows? So I was curious, and I'll be honest. When I was out there on Saturday, and it was raining in the morning, but then sun came out, ended up being a really comfortable, nice, it was a windy day. There were a lot of people there. A lot of people there. And the stadium's under construction, so there's a lot of moving parts.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to give it to the Penn State fans. This west side closed off due to construction, but south, north, east, lower deck, I was really impressed. I think they estimated somewhere in the 50,000 range. I don't know if there are 50,000 people in the stadium, but even 30 to 40,000, potentially the number, 25, 30, 40,000 in the stadium watching, and people come and go. It's free admission. I was really surprised by the turnout based on how I thought there was so little buzz leading up to it. And that, again, shows you the power of this sport, shows you the power of these brands, that on a late April Saturday, where there's so much going on, it's late in the semester, graduation's on the horizon, Easter was last week, it's the same weekend as the NFL draft. Here you still have 30, 40,000 people, 50,000 people, if that's the number you want to use, turning out to see the spring game. And I'm like, man, college football is so powerful. So, and I was really surprised. I really was surprised by that because of the lack of buzz going into it.
The buzz, I think, is tough just because so many programs are saying we don't want to do this,
Yeah.
or we're going to have a different format. So I think it's tough from fans' perspectives to get excited about something that you, number one, are unsure about.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, that basically coaches and the entire sport are saying, we don't really like doing this. We don't really want to do it. I think that's maybe why there was lack of buzz. And honestly, that number surprised me. I thought it'd be a lot lower just because I think fans care if you give them a reason to care. And I think the NBA kind of goes to this when they kind of almost poo-poo their own regular season. Then then you wonder why fans aren't as involved in a February Wednesday game, because you're kind of telling them it doesn't matter. So I think if you are telling college football fans, the spring game doesn't really matter, we're going to go through kind of the motions here, who cares? I think you'll see, that number is lower than what spring games before. And you'll see that, I'm sure, across all college football, like the spring game number is lower than what they've previously been. But still, college football is king. College football is legit. There's a lot of passion there. And even if it's a glorified practice, people want to see.
And I made this comment on the radio towards the end of the game, and I'm not sure if it has to do with the television or non-television aspect or not, but from watching what occurred, and they weren't out there incredibly long, probably about 90, 95 minutes, I felt like you saw more valuable reps than in the previous 10 years, dating back the last 10 years. Drew Aller, they did 7-on-7. So basically you're thrown against air. You have the 7-on-7. There's no rush. They did 6 plays for the white team and 6 plays for the blue team. And then the first quarter was touch or thud. The second quarter was touch or thud. Third and fourth quarter, running clock, live tackling. And even in the thud, obviously there's no hitting. You're not bringing guys to the ground. I thought you would see a lot of Jackson Smolik and Ethan Grunkemeyer, and no Katron Allen, and no Nicholas Singleton, and not any razzle-dazzle. They played their guys. They had them out there. And you only get 15 practices. You don't want to forfeit one of those 15 practices, especially when you're working with a new defensive coordinator. I know that's the other side of the ball. You don't want to forfeit one of those 15 practices. And then when they went live in the third quarter, Zane Durant may not have been out there. Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen may not have been out there, but Drew Aller sure was. So was Devontae Ross, the transfer from Troy, at wide receiver. So was Kyron Hudson at wide receiver. And they made a distinct effort to throw the ball in that live session with Aller and those wide receivers. And you got a real look at not only how Andy Kotelnicki may utilize a guy like a Devontae Ross, but the talents of Devontae Ross and Kyron Hudson. And I'll be honest with you, I came away. It's a spring game. It's 1s against 2s, although I feel like Penn State's defensive secondary is incredibly deep. I think that's one of my takeaways from that game. But I was really, really impressed. And this is right as the news is breaking that they're getting a transfer wide receiver. I was really, really impressed with Devontae Ross and Kyron Hudson. Hudson's got size. He went up and climbed the ladder on a ball over the middle. Aller threw it a little bit high, but he went up and made the catch. His route running was precise. You can see that he can work both the inside and outside of the field. Ross ran a couple of deep out routes, and his timing with Aller for having just gotten together this spring was really, really good. You could see Kotelnicki was using him in different ways, getting him the ball, coming across the backfield, getting it to him quickly in the flat, and then also trying to throw the ball deep. And then a couple other guys at that wide receiver position for Penn State. Tyseer Denmark, I thought, looked really good. Lyric Samuel, someone that James Franklin, a freshman wide receiver, he's talked a lot about during the spring. He did some really good things. And Liam Clifford was actually pretty involved as well in what they did offensively. One of those holdover, stalwart veteran guys that is trying not to get lost in the shuffle as they bring in Pena, the wide receiver from Syracuse, too, reportedly. So I was really impressed with that wide receiver group and the chemistry. And I asked James Franklin about it afterwards. I said, where do you feel like your passing game's at? We know you got Singleton and Allen and an offensive line and Drew back. Where's your passing game at? He's like, based on where we're at now, happy, but also still a lot of work to do. And if there's one element of your game that you can still really improve on over the summer compared to any other element, it's the passing game, because the quarterback can go out and work with those wide receivers, develop that chemistry and synergy, and you don't need coaches there to do it. And you can't have coaches there to do it. And he felt like if there was one area that they wanted to continue to see growth and improvement, and I think they're ahead of schedule there, but the one area you can continue to do that in over the course of the summer is that passing game. So my two biggest impressions, probably number one, the crowd support that was there. But number two, I was really impressed with the wide receivers and the depth that they had at that position. And obviously the top two guys seem like they're going to be improvements over Harrison Wallace III and Amari Evans. And then you bring another guy in, freshman, young guys. You know, Denmark was a freshman last year. Seems like they're taking another step. That is now becoming not a position of need for Penn State, but perhaps a position of depth for Penn State on a Penn State team that has high aspirations to win a national championship. And many think have a chance to do it this year. And they'll do it not just because of their elite high-end talent, but we talked about this on the broadcast, myself, Steve Jones, and Jack Ham, maybe as deep a Penn State team that's ever been assembled, because at running back, Singleton and Allen are different level guys, but they're 3 or 4 deep there. There's a legitimate competition between Grunkemeyer and Smolik at quarterback. Wide receiver now, bringing another guy, you're starting to get some depth there where you don't have to rush a Peter Gonzalez or a Tyseer Denmark or a Lyric Samuel or a Kobe Howard onto the field. Tight end, Khalil Dinkins is an excellent blocking tight end. He's been really good in the red zone. Look forward to seeing what he does with more reps. It seemed like he had really good chemistry with Drew Aller when he was in there, and a guy who can make catches. Plus, you're going to complement him with what I think is an emerging star in Luke Reynolds, who had a big year as a freshman last year, and Andrew Rappleyea and Joey Schlaffer. When Rappleyea gets back, Penn State's offensive line is incredibly, incredibly deep. They have a lot of guys who are on the second team that would be first team starters across the Big Ten. Secondary is really, really deep at safety and at cornerback. And it's odd to talk about this, but the two positions that I feel most concerned about their depth on what is a deep team are actually linebacker. And I think their starters are really good, but a lot of unknowns behind him. That's not saying that Anthony Specca, I think, is going to be really good. Dakari Nelson's going to be good and valuable, but you probably would like a little more veteran depth there. And the same probably at the defensive line spot right now. Zariah Fisher's coming off a couple of injuries. Could have a really good year across from Denai Dennis Sutton at defensive end. Defensive tackle, Zane Durant's a stud. one of the best defensive linemen in all of college football and a game changer from the defensive tackle position. Thought it was critical that they brought him back. But then, Alonzo Ford, when he gets back from injury, Xavier Gilliam, who else is going to be at that? The transfer they brought in from Michigan, who else is going to be at that defensive tackle spot? So they might have the guys there already in place, but they're unknowns. But overall, those are the three things. Obviously, crowd, receivers, but then the overall depth of the Penn State football team is particularly impressive, especially on offense. Wow.
And I think the receivers, that's clearly writing music to every Penn State fan's ears, because that's, I think, when you look at Penn State and you highlighted just the depth overall, the biggest question I think they have going into this year is receiver. And I think when you see how last year ended, losing to Notre Dame, Drew Aller throwing the pick and having receivers register 0 catches in that playoff game against Notre Dame, that I think when you look at Penn State and how far they end up going in 2025, I think the biggest thing you can point to is how good that receiver room is. If they are as good as maybe the hype says and what the projections are, Penn State's a legitimate national title contender. If we've seen that receiver room go the way they have the last 2 or 3 years, it feels like despite the talent, the depth, everywhere else, like if that position holds you back, it's really, really difficult to win a national title. So I think like that scouting report should be music to everyone from Penn State's fans' ears. And if you are Ohio State, Oregon, et cetera, teams that are looking to, knock off Penn State, that should be, again, it's a spring game, it's one practice. We're not going to get crazy, but a good, still a positive report is better than a negative report. That's one where there should be concern, because if Penn State figures out receiver, it feels like everything else around them will be figured out and be playing at a high level.
Yeah, and I apologize because it was a pretty long report that I gave back on the game. But
you are the only person we can get information from. So that was needed, because otherwise it's a few tweets and 1 or 2 videos from the stands. Thank you.
And I'll say this too. I think the wide receivers have really grown over the course of the spring. And obviously my observations, I've not been able to get to practices that I've hoped to get to over the course of the spring due to other commitments. But it wasn't just that game, from what I understand, that the receivers have been particularly impressive. I know James has talked about it at his press conference. Drew's talked about it a lot, his chemistry, synergy, how good he feels about that room there. So I don't think it's just that one practice where, they flashed today, and they're doing it against a great secondary. AJ Harris could be a first-round NFL draft pick next year. Zion Tracy, Elliott Washington. I thought Darius Dixon had a great spring game on Saturday. You can see the physicality there. Jim Knowles, the confidence that they already have in him, talking to some of the players, how they believe in his system. This is a group that feels like a team that went to the playoffs last year, felt like being around them on Saturday. We know what we got. There's still work to do. They're hungry. They want to get back there. But it just had the feel of not a college team where, there's some unpredictability to it. Or, I wonder what this season's going to be like. It felt like being around a professional, take care of the game, take care of this, on to the next thing, on to the next thing. It just felt so buttoned up. And I think Drew Aller looked a little slimmer. I think he looked really mobile. I think he looked athletic. Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton both lost weight during the offseason. They look slimmer. I think they look a half step faster, which is really dangerous, and even more powerful and explosive for each of them. I think they had a really good, albeit short, spring. And this seems like a group that knows what the expectations are, because that's the biggest thing with this team. How you have to stay healthy, but now that you've gotten there and had success there, winning 2 playoff games, you can say whatever you want about the opponents. They still won 2 playoff games. It's on their resume. Now that they're there and you have all this talk about what's coming back, how do you handle that? How are you equipped to handle that? Penn State always has expectations. It's not like all of a sudden there's expectations at Penn State. Penn State always had expectations. But now there's an increased sense of urgency of, if you don't do it this year, when everyone's saying this is the year, and how they navigate that which I think they'll be equipped to perfectly because they have a coach who is as consistent, reliable, 1-0, day-to-day, process-driven. I don't think that changes with them. And I asked him about that after the game. Like, how do you handle it now? He's like, we approach it the same way we always do. And I think people think it's cliche. I think they think it's corny. But I'll tell you what, it works, and he's great at it. And they all believe in that messaging, and they all repeat that messaging. And I think that's why they're equipped to handle what is a diff. It's not like they don't have expectations before. It's Penn State. There's always expectations. But now it's almost, you got all these guys returning. It's boom or bust with this group. How do you navigate that? Because there are going to be, at some point of the year, there are going to be challenges. There are going to be obstacles. There are going to be hurdles. It may not come in the form of a loss. It may come in the form of injuries, may come in the form of something that happens or is said. But how do you handle that? And that's going to be very interesting to see. But I think they're equipped. I think they've got the right group to do it.
And not that you're going to, you can just look at the last two national champions. Michigan in 2023 kind of did the same thing, right? Loaded up immense pressure to kind of, this is a do or die year, broke through and won. Ohio State, insane pressure last year. All they brought back, all the portal additions, they broke through and won. Both teams, for different reasons, like you said, not just a loss, but for different things that happened, they both faced adversity. They both had a great culture, and the talent plus the culture equaled winning a national title. Like you said, we won't Penn State's shown the ability to be resilient before, but like you said, new group every single year. How do you respond? You won't truly know until you face that moment of adversity at some point, early, middle, late in the year. The last two national champions had a lot of talent, but also expectation. They harnessed that for positive. Penn State, I think there's right now every reason to believe they can follow in Michigan and Ohio State's footsteps here in 2025 and do the same thing. Kind of the arrow right now, like you said, is pointing up. There's a lot of excitement and buzz, if you will, coming out of Happy Valley as we get set for a huge 2025 season trip.
I just want to put one more thing out there to put a bow on this discussion on the spring. And I know fans and reporter, everyone got a sense to see it over the course of the spring. A lot of guys out, but that means valuable reps for younger guys. And I think long-term that will pay off dividends. Tyler Warren, I think they talked about it, didn't do a ton last spring anyway. So we talked about this on the broadcast with a guy like Zane Durant, Deni Dennis Sutton, Singleton, Allen, even Khalil Dinkins, some of the linemen. You now are managing a 16-17 game season.
Yeah.
That's different than managing a 12-13 game season. How do you manage? You need to win every game. You want to win every game. You want to win every day. But it is no longer just a sprint in college football. It is a marathon in college football. And there really is something to how do you attack a long-term plan now versus just a short-term, okay, it's a sprint from September to the start of December, go. Now it's how do we approach our spring, our summer, our camp, now a season that extends September, October, November, December, multiple games, January, multiple games. And I think the value of the reps for some of the depth guys, even though you may have had some guys out for the spring that you really wish were out there, could end up paying dividends for a team like them as well.
Absolutely. I think that's what a large part of spring for. And like you said, I think that's also part of the reason why you're seeing spring practices kind of change the format is to keep guys fresh for the long grind that is possibly a 17-game season. That is definitely exciting. A new calculus here as well. One thing also to add really fast before we do move on here. It went viral on Saturday. James Franklin going back and forth with a fan. The only thing I want to say, Tripp, is this. For Franklin, but this is also applicable to any coach in college football. It's not worth it. There's nothing to gain by arguing with a fan and going back and forth about something they said. By all reports, the fan called Franklin a fraud. That's why they went back and forth for like 30 seconds before it dissipated. We've seen it before. It's just, there's nothing to, I just don't see what there is to gain by trying to to listen to and almost give credence to what essentially someone in the vocal minority is saying. I just let it go. And I can speak to this myself, Tripp. You should see the tweets, the DMs that I get when I host my show on Sunday night on the Infinity Sports Network. People say some crazy things, but like responding to Eggface247, that like, what am I getting? What am I gaining there by going back and forth by someone who like has one follower just trying to get under your skin? There's just, in the court of public opinion, for someone of Franklin's stature, and again, this is any Big Ten coach, essentially any college football coach, you're not going to win. It's not worth it. Just like water off a duck's back. Let it go. Move on. You'll be better for it. And it saves you a headache. That's what I would say.
You can have your opinion or take on whether any coach in that situation should engage or not engage a fan, coach, a troll, whatever it may be. But I'll tell you, I am tired. As you're talking about DMs, messages you get, the faceless, nameless, that fan who's yelling in the stands, guess what? You got called out and are being held accountable, and someone's asking you to come and have a face-to-face conversation and have a discussion and welcoming that discussion. Maybe it's a hard lesson that some people need to start learning, that there is accountability for your actions. You can't be faceless, nameless, just a voice. And then when you're at the wrong place, wrong time, and someone sees you and calls you out for that, it's an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to have a discussion. It's an opportunity to grow. And again, you can have your opinion whether someone in that position should or shouldn't do it. I understand that. But James Franklin talks all the time about Penn State football not being a transactional experience, but a transformational experience. Here, why all of a sudden is that fan, and doing it at a spring game, blue-white game? Come on. But why all of a sudden is that fan, now you got the coach's attention, whatever coach that may be. Now you're going to run and hide? That's the problem. It's a societal problem that we feel like when our name's not attached to it, when our face isn't attached to it, we can say whatever we want. But the second your name, your face, your voice, your social media handle is attached to it, and you can identify that person, besides deep digging through an IP address, you're just going to run and hide? That's a problem. It's a problem with our society. So, hey, be a man, be a woman, whoever it is. Walk down there and have that conversation. And you want to be a tough guy and yell? Cool. Okay. Well,
I think it's very fair.
Here's your chance. Like that's someone saying, all right, here's your opportunity. Voice your displeasure. You can disagree with me. You don't have to like me. But at least put your name to it. At least put your voice to it. And people won't do it because everyone's a keyboard warrior. Everyone has a voice when you don't know who it is. And again, you can say whether you like the coach doing that or not, think you should or shouldn't, whatever coach it may be. But that's a problem with our society. And you know what? About time someone held someone accountable for it.
That's very fair. I think especially societal, I think you nailed that. There's way too many people that would love to talk behind your back and not say anything to your face. I 100% agree with that. Speaking of lesson, Tripp, let's see how many lessons Dylan Raiola takes from year number 1 to year number 2. Matt Rhule was on Big Ten Network late last week, and he was asked, what kind of jump do you expect to see from Dylan Raiola here in year number 2? Take a listen to what Nebraska's head coach had to say.
When you look at great quarterbacks, though, on the field, I think he's made a big step in the offseason, I should say. Just his development, his mindset, just his growth. I've been really proud. And the next step is, taking the ball at the end of the game, sometimes even against insurmountable odds, and going down and winning the game. Throwing touchdowns in the red zone in tight windows. It's not making the easy play, it's making the tough plays. And so he's never shied away from that. He's made a ton of big plays. But we're gonna be in some tough games down the stretch, and we have to be able to hand the ball to Dylan. he takes his offense out there and they go win the game.
I like that from Matt Rhule because I think he's 100% right, Tripp. Like, I think when you look at Nebraska's 2025 outlook and where this season goes, if Raiola can take that step here and finish games like he's talking about specifically, you go back to last year, Nebraska in one possession games was just 2-5. And a lot of those times, Raiola had the ball in his hand with the chance to tie or win the game and did not come through. Had an interception on his final drive against Ohio State as they tried to pull off the upset in the shoe. Couldn't get it done. Took 2 brutal sacks in overtime against Illinois. Ended up being a home loss to the Illini. Could not finish the final drive against USC, throw a pick in the end zone on the final play of the game. And fumbled against Iowa in his own end that led to Iowa kicking the game-winning field goal. And you lose right there. If Rhule, I like that because he's right. Nebraska plays close games. And for them to take the next step here in 2025, they're going to need their quarterback to finish drives in 2025 they couldn't do in 2024.
No, I think the offense changed a lot for this team that I'm going to compare that to. But Illinois was on the wrong end of one-loss game or one-score games the year before. And then this year in 2024, they're on the right end of it. And it's because Luke Altmaier played clean football and very efficient football. Now, they changed where they were more of a passing offense. But ultimately, if you look at how he managed games, that's the difference between a 3 or a 7-point loss and a 3 or a 7-point win. And maybe get a little luck on your side at some point. Like if you're going to play all one-score games, I think Iowa's victim to this through the years. At some point, you're just not going to get the bounce, the call. There's a lot of factors that are out of your control that anytime you're just playing one-score games and your margin is so slim that you're working with, it's not a national championship formula. Let's put it that way. You can have a lot of success. You can win a lot of games, but you're living on the edge. Looking at Dylan Raiola's games and numbers from last year, and we know they made the change at offensive coordinator to bring in Dana Holgorsen late in the year. There's actually a silver lining here. Now, Nebraska didn't win the games, but if you go back over their final 3 games last year, Raiola only threw 1 interception. He only threw 1 interception. And in 3 of his last 4 games, he had a completion percentage of 70% or greater. And in the one game he did, it was still 68.8%. So while they weren't getting the results, and at this point, I think a lot of people were out on Nebraska and stopped caring about Nebraska and like, this is the lost cause this year. Raiola played better football down the stretch, cleaner football down the stretch, more efficient football down the stretch. And that can be a silver lining going in to 2025. Now, here's the areas he has to clean up, right? If you look big picture last year, 27 sacks. It's not all on the quarterback, but as a young quarterback, you need to trust your receivers, trust your reads, trust your routes, know when to get rid of the ball and when to give up on a play. He needs to use his mobility, which isn't great, but it's good. He needs to use it as an advantage the way his idol, right, Patrick Mahomes, uses his. He needs to use it as an advantage and not a detriment, because that's what it became at times last year. And then the sacks lead to negative plays. Negative plays lead to you being behind the sticks, which leads to turnovers and forcing things. So big picture, yeah, that's where he cleans it up. But silver lining, he did make some strides when it was all lost in the circus of Nebraska football and the lost hope in Nebraska football down the stretch in 2024.
And you look, if you're going to take that jump here in 2025 and go from a 7-win team to maybe a 9, dare I say 10-win team, it's going to be Raiola. Because you look at some of these games, Tripp, at home against Michigan, at Minnesota, home versus USC, at Penn State, home against Iowa. I think a lot of those games are going to come down to, can your quarterback make a play, make a drive, especially late, to win the game? Most cases in 2024, that was not the case. If you can learn and talk about what Matt Rhule's talked about here, making that next jump, I think you can see Nebraska having a really solid year. Again, 9-3, maybe borderline 10-win team, but it's going to come down to Raiola's ability here late in the fourth quarter, just like his idol. Mahomes feels like anytime he's got the ball, game in the balance, he comes through. Not to do it every time, but to do it a lot more than he did last year. That's for sure. That's going to be, I think, the biggest thing here to watch when you talk about Nebraska, what they could do. Their win total number 7.5. So to get to 8 wins, to get to 9 wins, that's the area. They rehauled their wide receiver room, so there's at least some more talent for Raiola here in 2025 than it was last year. The pieces are there. The development should be, like you said, with Dana Holgorsen now having a full off season, there should be even more continuity and familiarity and comfortability in that offense. It should lead to him playing a lot better here in 2025 and Nebraska having a lot better season and finishing stronger than they did last year. Speaking of finishing strong, Tripp, the spring portal has finally closed. Now, there's some players that still can make a decision, but the last day to enter the spring portal has come and gone. So for the most part, a lot of teams' rosters are pretty much set. Mm-hmm. Not ironclad set, but for the most part, we have a good idea of what every roster is going to look like here in 2025. I want to highlight two teams that make big splashes in the spring portal window here that I think could pay dividends in 2025. The first one's go to Ohio State. They landed UNC defensive end Beau Atkinson, who, number one, chose Ohio State over Georgia and over South Carolina. So you beat out two SEC teams to get a player where maybe you don't need defensive end, that position specifically, but Ohio State defensive line help, and they got that so far.
Can I interrupt and ask a question? Why would you want to leave UNC right now?
Maybe he's seen some videos of his coaches or his coach getting controlled by his girlfriend that looked like she just graduated college, and maybe said, I want to go somewhere else. I want to play for Ryan Day instead of playing for Bill Belichick. You think it has anything to do with it?
What a weird
really interview. Playing for Jordan Hudson.
What a weird interview.
Can I throw something crazy out here? I actually don't think it's that wild or weird. I think that's what Bill wants. I think Bill Belichick wants someone that controls every aspect of his life that's not football, so he can only think about football. Why worry about what interview you have to do or what to even say in the interview if you could have somebody do it? And that way you can spend more time, game planning a 4-3 defense to stop Louisville's quarterback instead of worrying about your taxes or worrying about what to say.
Then why write a book and go out on a publicity tour for it?
Well, that's a fair question.
Is your girlfriend there?
She is not. No, she's in the office today.
I say this would be the perfect opportunity for a guest spot on the podcast to get her take.
That's actually good. That's a really good point. That's great producing by you. Maybe I'll have to ask her. Maybe next week we can get a guest celeb appearance to give her take on Bill Belichick. And I don't know if she even knows Bill Belichick as a girlfriend, so I got to, get up to speed about that and show her the interview. Sure. But I'd love her take.
I think I got a 30-second clip that will pretty much tell her all.
Yeah, you want the full picture? Watch this. You'll get a quick idea.
Speaking of the pictures, hey, here you go. Yeah.
So maybe that's why Beau Atkinson said, all right, I'm out of here. Yeah. But you look at what he brings to Ohio State. Played 2 years at UNC, registered a total of 54 tackles, had 11 sacks. That he was UNC's leading sack man. Tripp in 2024 had 7.5, does have 2 years eligibility remaining. Look at his size. Dude's a freak. 6'6", 260. I will say, Tripp, I think it's a good move by Ohio State. I think he's going to fit in well. I think better coaching, better talent around him will get even more out of him here in 2025. Mm-hmm. I think maybe we should pump the brakes a little bit in terms of the hype, just because I think when you break down his Beau Atkinson's numbers here a little bit more, we told you he had 7.5 sacks, led UNC last year. Well, those 7.5 sacks came in just 4 games. The 4 opponents which he registered those sacks were against JMU. He had 3.5 sacks against Florida State, one of the worst Power 4 teams, maybe the worst Power 4 team in all of college football last year, giving Purdue a run for their money. He had 2 versus Virginia and 1 versus UConn in a bowl game. You look against some of the best teams they played, Minnesota week 1, Pitt, Georgia Tech, NC State. He had 7 total tackles in those 4 games. He's going to have to become more consistent for the Buckeyes. And again, I think with better coaching, better players around him, that could come. But he's got good size. He's got 2 years eligibility left. He has produced before. I think it's a good pickup. But again, I think there's also, with that being said, there is something to prove here for Beau Atkinson with the Buckeyes in 2025. All right, so that's one, I think, big spring portal transfer addition that I think will pay dividends here for a Big Ten school in 2025. The other big one here was one we talked about recently. Trebor Pena from Syracuse visited Penn State, also visited a few other Big Ten schools as well, has, at least on social media, committed to Penn State, which now adds even more beef to that wide receiver room. You mentioned Ross, you mentioned Hudson as the 2 transfer receivers already impressing for Penn State in that receiver room here during spring practice. Well, now Penn State possibly could add a guy, Tripp, 84 catches for 941 yards last year at Syracuse, 9 touchdowns, was a second team all ACC selection. I think the biggest thing that he's going to bring to this receiver room is yards after the catch. He had 475 yards after the catch. Add him, by the way, with Ross, who had 481 yards after the catch. Why that's so important for Penn State in 2025 was you look at last year, one of the downfalls for the receiver room, they did not make much happen outside of catching the football. Their leading receiver in terms of yak yards was Harrison Wallace with just 193. So you bring in 2 guys, Tripp, that almost 4x that production and are just as dangerous before they get the ball as they are after get the ball. Pena, Ross, Hudson, along with some of the other freshmen and unproven receivers you mentioned before as well. This feels like Penn State, all of a sudden, a giant question going into spring football. What's the receiver room going to look like? Who's going to step up? It feels like now coming out of spring, dare I say, this could be one of the strengths of the team.
And in an Andy Kotelnicki offense that I think can be designed to get those yards after catch. Look at Tyler Warren and his ability to run after the catch last year. And that's obviously a really special player, maybe the best tight end ever to play at Penn State. And very, very versatile. But I think Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen were big factors in that passing game in that area as well. And maybe this helps. Maybe could you imagine having some threats on the outside and take a little pressure off of Allen and Singleton in the passing game, but open things up for them in the running game? It's interesting you mentioned, is it the best wide receiver room Franklin has had at Penn State? And I think it's too early to tell. You just can't tell yet. The early returns are really positive, but it probably is a jump to make. And I think what's been lost in the shuffle the last 2 years, because Parker Washington left early when many thought he would come back for another season. But really, it's just been this 2-year thing, which happens to coincide with Drew Aller, who many believe has the potential to be the best quarterback or one of the best quarterbacks to play at Penn State. And next year should be the first Penn State quarterback to be drafted in the first round since Kerry Collins was selected in the first round of the NFL draft. Here's the thing. It's not like they haven't had good receivers, because they had Jahan Dotson and Parker Washington in a receiver room together. They had KJ Hamler, Chris Godwin, Deshaun Hamilton. That room in 2016, the team that went to the Rose Bowl, Chris Godwin, Deshaun Hamilton, DeAndre Tompkins, that's a pretty good team.
That is, yeah. And produced at a high
level.
level.
Like they haven't had receivers, but for whatever reason, the last 2 years has been such a void for their offense and guys not stepping up at the position. There's been all this, it's almost like a narrative on Penn State that they don't develop or don't, like wide receivers don't play at Penn State. No, they do. Just the last couple of years, it's been a bit of a black hole for them, and it's really curious as to why.
I think the timing also matters too, because like you said, when you bring Drew Allen with all this hype, now that receiver position's even more, there's more attention on it because, hey, we got the quarterback, so now it's got to be everyone else around him. And it is only 2 years, like you said. I mean, you had Jahan Dotson and Parker Washington there just in 2021, who both had really strong years. So they've had one and multiple receivers at the same time produce, but it has been a little bit of a drought. I think that's now been exacerbated with even more increased expectations over the last few years. And now it feels like Penn State has put themselves in a really strong position. You got to pan out, you got to play the game, stay healthy, right? But it feels like at least on paper have put themselves in a really strong position, and one of the strongest positions they've been in Franklin's time in Happy Valley of getting legitimate, consistent, explosive production from multiple wide receivers. I think there's a lot of reason to believe now when you kind of look at how this receiver room's coming, especially with now reportedly 3 different transfers coming into the room, along with some other, younger talent that can step up in some opportunities here. I think there's every reason to be positive, Tripp. I think there's every reason to be positive and feel like 2025 will end different than 2024 in the sense of not having a receiver be one of your biggest downfalls in the biggest game of the year. I think James Franklin and the recruiting staff deserve credit for shoring up a weakness and making sure at least the same mistake does not repeat itself in 2025. let's also talk some history, Tripp, because the NFL draft you just mentioned before came and gone. Right? We are now recording this on Tuesday. First round, second round, third round, all complete. We saw history here from the Big Ten Conference overall as 71 Big Ten players were drafted over the course of 3 days, a conference record. Ohio State led the way, 14 players drafted, tying a school record, second most all time behind Georgia's a few years ago, but 15 players drafted. 4 Buckeyes go in round number 1. Again, Ohio State won the national title. We talked about it preseason, how talented they were. Panned out in the draft, safe to say.
15% of the first 45 picks in the NFL draft were Ohio State Buckeyes.
That's impressive. That's impressive. A lot of talent here coming from the Big Ten. I think that's also kind of highlights, and look at the question below. I think you're looking at like the Big Ten and the SEC gap in terms, not just accomplishments here, but also talent. I don't think it's ever been closer.
Don't know that it ever was apart.
I mean, I think the SEC, when you look at the draft and the talent they have, like, I think there's been a gap before in terms of, even if it's not equaled production, I think there's been a gap in terms of when you look at how many SEC players get drafted, all the talent that comes out of the Southeast, especially in Georgia and Florida. I think the SEC has loaded up on a lot of talent, but now I think you're starting to see a lot more Big Ten programs getting into some of those, what used to be SEC-dominated hotbeds, and pulling out a lot of talent on their own. You've seen Penn State do it. You've seen Ohio State do it. A lot of teams go down. We just saw Michigan do it here as well. I know Bryce Underwood's from Michigan, but take a recruit from LSU. We've seen USC go down Louisiana and get talent out as well. I think the Big Ten's doing a better than ever job of taking talent that normally in almost any other situation would go to an SEC school and bringing them up north, or in some cases, bringing them out west and keeping them in the conference. I think not just in terms of national championships and like wins, but I think just in terms of pure talent and what you're able to churn out to the next level, I think you're really I think they're, to me, neck and neck, Tripp, when you look at the Big Ten and the SEC in terms of what they're able to do. One other thing I want to run by you here before we wrap up the pod. Oregon was number 2 in terms of the Big Ten in terms of NFL draft talent. They had 10 players drafted. Michigan was 3 with 7. And here's a shock that I did not see coming, so shame on me. Maryland, 4th in the conference in terms of amount of players drafted at 6. I'm an optimist, so I'm going to look at this as, if you're a Maryland fan, you should take this more as an optimistic approach, because your school is proven for the ability to get talent there. Mm-hmm. Now it's just about translating the NFL talent to wins. It's not like you have nobody. I'd rather have talent there and right now currently be unable to figure it out versus have no talent around me to work with. If you go 4-8, it's surprising to see, but at least I think it's optimistic.
This reminds me a lot of what Emory Hunt was talking about last week when we were discussing Rutgers and Minnesota at length. There's talent, maybe a first-round pick here or there, maybe a second-round pick here or there, more mid to late round talent than anything else. But there's talent, and the difference between Maryland and those other 2 schools is those other 2 schools are consistently bowl eligible or trying to get to bowl eligibility. Rutgers' case, it's a little bit different, but Minnesota consistently bowl eligible. Rutgers with Greg Schiano, consistently competitive. Maryland consistently a head scratcher for the most part. So why are they not maximizing that talent? Probably never going to compete with, they're not going to have the depth to compete with Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Oregon, Southern Cal, Washington. But why are they not Minnesota or Rutgers?
That's a great question. I think that should be the question you should be asking yourself. And if Mike Locksley can't get you there, I think he's done a good job at bringing talent in. But also, I think you can feel good with, Maryland, Virginia, those are talent-rich states. New Jersey, you're close by, talent-rich state. I think you can get talent to your school. I'm with you. Like, the fact that you can't right now be even Rutgers level of consistency, it has to be frustrating, but at least you're getting the talent there. That was a surprise, at least for me, to say the least, when you sit there and look at Maryland number 4 in terms of the conference with most players drafted in 2025. And you look at the record, 4-8 last year, and not much going for him in 2025 either. Let's finish the pod with this here, Tripp. I like Greg McElroy a lot. I think he's a really smart mind. He obviously played the game at a high level, won a national championship with Alabama. So now that spring football is ending, you're starting to see the lists come out. And he decided this week to put out his top 10 quarterback list. So I'm going to put up on the screen for those watching on YouTube. We'll read it off here for those listening on the podcast. But as you see the names here, and as we're about to read off the names, he did have one stipulation as to how he created this list. And he said he did not want to project. So his goal was to rank the top quarterbacks who have already proven themselves against top-tier talent in the past. So the big name everyone nationally is freaking out about is on this top 10 list. He did not have Arch Manning at all. He had Cade Klubnik of Clemson 1, John Mateer of Oklahoma 2, former Washington State quarterback, Sam Levitt of Arizona State 3, Drew Aller, first Big Ten quarterback listed, only Big Ten quarterback listed, spoiler, here at 4, Garrett Nussmeier of LSU 5, Carson Beck going from Georgia to Miami 6, Lenore Sellers 7, Sawyer Robertson of Baylor 8, DJ Lagway of Florida 9, and Haynes King of Georgia Tech 10. Tripp, I am shocked. I don't know how you feel. I am shocked. We did not hear, especially when you talk about proven against top-tier talent, we did not hear Luke Altmaier of Illinois. That feels egregious. Egregious. You disagree?
I think he's good. I think he had a really good year last year, but he plays at Illinois and probably could use another year to prove it. I mean, how do we know Luke Altmaier is not 11?
He may be. We only got the top 10, but
maybe he's 11.
When you if you've seen Carson Beck, I can't sit here and tell you Carson Beck is better, or I would trust him more than Luke Altmaier. Sawyer Roberts, DJ Lagway was finished strong, okay, but he was still up and down as a freshman. I think when you talk about proven talent, I think he is a top 10 quarterback in the country going into 2025. If you're saying we're excluding guys that have not started yet.
I think that's fair. But how do you know that Greg McElroy didn't have him 11 or 12? What's the difference between being 8th? You knew what you were walking into with a list and a ranking topic for me on April 29th. I'm not going to get worked up whether he's in the top 10 or not. I would put him in it.
You would put him in.
He's 11.
You think he's a top 10 quarterback? Or you're saying he's 11? You're saying he's the first one out?
There's a lot of from 6 down. If Luke Altmaier is in there, I'm like, good, he deserves to be. But once you get through the top 5, they're all kind of, what have you done for me? I don't know.
That feels disrespectful. Okay. I think he should be. I think he's top 10 quarterback. Again, if you are talking about no projections, I think he's already done enough to put it. I know you love it, so I'm going to ask you one more question. Then is Drew Aller too low at number 4? I'm going to ask you a question about lists every week, just to see eventually when you break.
Yeah, I would have Drew Aller higher. I think he did a lot of things last season that people took for granted and were overlooked. Just because he didn't throw for 40 touchdowns, I think Drew Aller should be higher. Yes. He was the quarterback on a team that went to the college football playoff semifinals, and he was as much a reason that they were that far than anyone. Yes.
I would put him at 2 or 3. I think he's definitely above Sam Levitt. And I think it's a toss-up with John Mateer and him. I would probably say right now Cade Klubnik 1 and Aller 2. I would move Aller a little bit higher. So we got an answer out of you. Finally, this guy has caved.
You knew what you were walking into.
Oh, I know
what you're walking into.
I know. And you know what? If you aren't a list guy,
I stick to my guns.
I know. And I'll bring the outrage for both of us. I'll bring 2 times the frustration.
Thank you.
To even it out. So that'll do it for this edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. Thank you as always for watching and or listening. Make sure you do subscribe wherever you do watch or listen to make sure to miss any content coming your way. Next week, we'll do a deep dive on Oregon. I got another list for Tripp that he's going to absolutely hate to discuss. Yes. And maybe, hopefully, fingers crossed, the grading hell that Tripp is in right now will be all smooth and all clear. So we'll talk to you next week. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next week on the Still Enrolled podcast.